Welcome to episode 117 of the Forward from 50 podcast, where we interview people over 50 who are pursuing new direction for their lives. It's an opportunity for men and women to tell their stories their way and in their own words. I'm Greg Gerber, the founder of Forward from 50, and your host for today's show. On this episode, I sat down with a dynamic mother-daughter duo, Amy Goober and Gwen Bordon. They teamed up to write a heartfelt and deeply insightful book titled My Mother Always Says, 25 Lessons for Finding the Silver Lining. Our conversation explored the beauty and complexity of the mother-daughter relationship, how wisdom is transferred across generations, and the ways we can preserve meaningful life stories. Here are my top 3 takeaways from our conversation. Number 1, you can't have impact without contact. Gwen emphasized the importance of physically showing up for loved ones. Whether attending a grandchild's recital or sharing a meal, consistent presence strengthens relationships in ways that virtual communication simply cannot match. Number 2, there are no bad experiences, only ones you don't learn from. Gwen, now in her 90s, has weathered personal trials with unwavering optimism. Her resilience is a powerful reminder that even our most difficult seasons can offer valuable life lessons, but only if we're willing to learn from them. Number 3, everyone has a story, and it's worth telling. Amy and Gwen encourage families to capture and preserve their living history, whether through video, audio, or written reflections, so that future generations can benefit from the wisdom of those who came before them. To give them an opportunity to tell their story, please welcome Amy Goober and Gwen Bordon to the show. Thank you for joining me today, Amy and Gwen. I really appreciate the time. I love that you are writing a book about things that your mother taught you. That's all of us have lessons that our mothers have taught us. You've expanded that greatly into this book. How did the book idea come about?
I found that I was quoting my mother a lot. I'm sure I quoted her throughout my life, but I found in the last 5 years or so that I was really saying my mother, as my mother would say, and in this situation, my mother would say this, and my mother always says this. And so I said, I better put this into a book. And so we started out with the life lessons, and that's all we were doing. And we did a lot of work on that. And then my mother said, we need the glue to hold it together. So that's when we added the memoir part, which is her life story from when she was born until today. So that's the gist of it all, is her story and the lessons learned in those different times in her life, what she believes the lesson is about. And then I give my sort of more modern, if you can call 65 modern, take on it.
Okay.
And here we are.
I love it because there is a relationship with moms and daughters that is different from fathers and daughters for some reason. I don't know what it is. Many times the women are just butting heads all the time, but it's neat that you folks have cooperated in developing this relationship or this book. What caused that?
Listen, it's developed over the years. When Amy was much younger, we were not a good fit. We were not.
Okay.
Amy would say, why can't I eat food like other people? Why are we having brown rice? Why are we having duck and lamb chops? Other people don't eat that way. Why do I have a mother who's discussing politics at breakfast? Why can't I have a different mother? So I wasn't the mother she exactly wanted growing up.
But she was a mother she needed.
It was the mother I needed to be for her.
Okay.
That way. But I took my children cross country, not once, but twice, because I had this feeling they should see the national parks. And Amy only wanted to be back home with her friends. And she'd hit the back of our station wagon and say, you've seen one mountain, you've seen them all. You've seen one stream, you've seen them all. She was not interested at all. And I thought this was the trip of a lifetime. However, since she's grown up, I think she's come to appreciate that aspect of our life. But we were not exactly the mother she wanted to have then. What helped me was Amy having a child. And then I was able to get a second chance and be the grandmother she was happy to have for her children.
Isn't that the way it works for all of us?
It works for me because my grandchildren taught me how to be a good grandmother and pay more attention to their needs rather than my own.
How can the mother-daughter relationship inspire growth and connection in families?
I think it's like any relationship in terms of it is what you make it. But I think even in today's world, with so much technology and so many people on their phones, which, I am too, but I think that there's like less of that interpersonal relationship as kids get older. And I think you have to work at it.
That's
If
right.
you want that for a mother-daughter relationship. And people do say to us, especially with this book, oh my God, you're so lucky. Oh my God, it's amazing. Oh my God, it's fantastic. And it wasn't easy creating it at all. And we certainly didn't agree on everything. It wasn't completely harmonious, but we ended up with a product that we both really feel great about. But it wasn't easy to get here, is what I would say.
And we had the additional handicap or obstacle of not living near each other. In other words, when Amy finished with Cornell, she went to live in Boston. I stayed on Long Island because I had a career and a new marriage to work on. So Amy was a 4.5-hour trip for me. And when she had the first child, Samantha, she looked at me and said, are you going to be too busy to come up here? And I said, oh, I'll be up every month. And I did. I was like a yo-yo driving so that I was there for every single event. Whereas both of the parents in the town, she lived right there. I had to travel up, and I really must congratulate myself. I didn't miss a dance recital, a play. I got to Jimmy's games. I got to Jesse's moving up from nursery school to preschool. I made it my business to do the traveling so that we reduced the distance we might have had. And luckily for us, we weren't using cell phones and video. So I had to show up and be there.
It sounds like you learned a lesson that I learned a long time ago. You cannot have impact without contact.
Yes, and I'm a great believer in what Woody Allen said is 80% of success in life is showing up.
That's right. And my mother did the same thing that you did. She was always at my daughter's recitals and plays and pageants, and wherever they were doing something, my mom was involved in that. And I think it impacted their life positively. They had a great relationship with my mother. Not so much a good relationship with me when they were growing up.
Maybe that's the way it is. Maybe practice on our own children so that we can do a good job with our grandchildren.
I think it's another thing as well is that you as a grandparent are probably reinforcing what Amy was teaching her kids. But coming from you, that lesson was a little easier to take than coming from mom.
It was painless and a wonderful experience, is all I can say.
That's great. Gwen, you've lived for nearly a century. And what
That's
are
right.
some of the lessons that you've learned that really stand out in your life?
What I can tell you is I'm the luckiest woman in the world. And I'm a great believer in if you're lucky, if at your birth, when the good fairies are giving things out, they gave me optimism and they gave me good luck because I have lived through a lot of perilous experiences and challenging experiences. I always believed everything would be all right and I would be all right. And I have been. And here I am. And I'm not done yet.
That is a great attitude to have, to be able to have that kind of resilience.
I think that's a gift. I don't think you develop resilience. When you read the book, you'll see how I was born under very trying circumstances. And all of those, what you would call bad experiences, turned out to be the learning experiences of my life. So my message is there are no bad experiences, just the ones you don't learn from.
That's right. Yep, I agree with that. What are some of the lessons that really stood out to you?
Well,
From the book.
of the book, what stood out to me was you didn't need to have your own parents. In other words, my own parents had to reject me at birth because my sister had polio.
Oh,
And so all attention was focused on keeping that little girl moving in a bathtub. My mother, with an 8th grade education, used the Kenny treatment on her 4.5-year-old. So I was passed off to my father's younger sister, who was 17, a cousin who was 18, and I was passed around like an hors d'oeuvre to a family who all took care of me. And apparently what I must have learned then was if you're nice and you smile, people will be good to you.
okay.
Because I thrived as a baby. I never was sick. I thrived all my life, learning that other people can be your parents. You don't need to have just the parents you were born into.
I've said that all along as well. My parents were divorced when I was 8 years old, so I rarely saw my dad, and then he died when I was 19. So basically, I was fathered by God and other people, other men who came into my life at just the right time with the right lesson.
Mentoring figures are very important. And it's good that you had that experience because you come to appreciate that you don't have to have one person in your life to be happy. I did bereavement work when I had my second, third career as a social worker. And I have women in my office, especially all the 9/11 widows, all young women with young children whose husbands went to work and were killed down in the World Trade Center. And they kept saying, I'll never be happy again. This was the only love of my life. And what they learned is you can love many people in your life. There's just one person that's going to be the one and only for you. So you learn that you can love more and you can be loved by many people. And I think that's a good life experience.
I agree. Gwen, how can older women pass on their wisdom to younger generations in practical ways?
As you said before, you have to be there, you have to participate, and you have to appreciate what it is that they're saying. In other words, you have to listen to them, as well as you don't teach by preaching, you teach by behavior. So just being there and appreciating what they're doing, laughing at their jokes, cooking for them, hugging them, but you have to have that contact over the telephone.
And you can do it over the phone? Is that what you said?
Oh, no.
Cannot. Right. Yeah.
It is a bad substitute. That's why I think so many people are lonely, because they're using the internet for their relationships.
I just heard that there's more and more of that people are finding it easier to communicate with ChatGPT. And so they're asking the computer and the robot for life advice rather than asking other people for a human connection and things like that. The one thing that Contact does is it allows us to look for open doors, because it's through those conversations that we might sense that they're asking question, but not really. And we can jump in and offer advice at that point.
And even learning that we don't have to agree on all the same things, that you can love and learn without having to be obedient and say yes all the time. It's all right to say no. It's all right to say, I don't agree with you.
That's not something that was taught to us when we were kids. It was our adults were always right. And it was, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. And that was it.
Not in my family.
Not in your family.
Oh, I did not grow up thinking my parents were always right. I disagreed with them. And I think that rebelliousness, and there were nights when I used to have dinner with my parents. At the dinner table, we would disagree violently on politics, especially my father and me. And I would push my chair and slam the door, go to my room, and I didn't have dinner, and so what?
Oh, my.
But my father and I bumped heads all the time.
Okay. That's unusual, because it's usually fathers and daughters who have the better relationship. And
Not the father and his daughter.
Amy, how has your mother's lessons influenced you in ways that you approach your own life, especially parenting?
Yeah, I think that what's great about the lessons that are in this book is that they are really phrases, most of them, so they're easily retrievable in your mind. And so I think that there are times when I'm facing a struggle or a challenge and I remember this phrase or this mantra, and it helps get me through. So it's like on a case-by-case basis, but I think it's really important that we all have voices in our head. But for a lot of women, the voices in their head are very negative.
I agree.
They were raised in a way that the parents weren't happy with them, or they didn't look the right way, so it was a lot of criticism. But nice to have the voice that I have in my head of my mother's words are how to get through something, how to overcome an obstacle, how to give perspective to things that might seem too big. And so I think that it is a good lesson in parenting. Also, a lot of the lessons have to do with parenting, but one of the comments that my son-in-law made, he read the book in his review, my daughter's husband, and he said toward the end something like, it shows us how hard it is to be a parent and to have a parent. It's not always easy to have a parent either. So it's all interesting.
How much of that is a repetitiveness in the messages that you heard growing up?
How much of what is?
The lessons that you learned, the things that your
Oh,
mother taught
I
you.
don't think it was not as much of when I was growing up as when I was an adult.
You were better
I
open
remember
to hearing that.
yeah. I don't remember hearing as much of, I don't remember it. I remember a lot of interactions, but these kind of sayings and lessons, I feel like I've heard more as I was an adult and parenting my own children and facing my own obstacles. And I'm an entrepreneur, so in businesses and all that. So I think it's more, when I say recent, I'm 65. Let's say in the last 20 years.
Most of what both Amy and her brother experienced, I think, growing up was not so much talking about this as that modeling. This is the behavior. I was a doer and not much of a preacher. So it wasn't do as I say, it was more do as I do.
That's an excellent point.
So I think they learned from example. Amy's father died when she was, 15?
15.
But his modeling for them was a loving, strong, hardworking, caring man. It was his behavior. He was not much on talking to his children about how to be and what to do because he worked 7 days a week. So it was his behavior, the caring and loving you do by providing for your family and being there more than you're saying. I was the mother who was the busy one. I was the Cub Scout leader. I was the PTA person. I was making all the cupcakes. I was a doer, but not a talker about this until much later on when I became a social worker and I was now trying to teach other family members how to be with their children, that I put that more into words.
So you were demonstrating that contact is important.
I think behavior, I think you are right about it, and I am. Showing up, just being there, sitting in the audience, being at the game, walking through the football field. I froze my tush off at more football games for my grandson than I would have done for anybody else. I wasn't telling Jimmy, I just was there.
And that way I'm envious of you because all of my grandkids are up in Wisconsin and Illinois and in Texas. So for me to get there to attend all of those requires a flight and not a 4-hour drive.
That was not good planning.
It was not good planning.
Not good planning.
That's exactly right. Why do you think it's so critical that we listen to the voices of those who are further ahead of us in our journey in life?
I think so many of today's influencers are these young kids with a lot of flash, and that's who is being followed.
Exactly.
And why? Because they have good social media skills, because they can attract likes and followers. And so I think and people have said this to us during this process, because I run women's events in the Boston area, and my mother has spoken at the last 3. So we usually get around 100 women at each event. So there's a lot of women that have heard her speak as one of many speakers. And they all say, look, if I'm going to follow someone's advice, it's the person who's 93.
Mm-hmm.
I'm following the advice of the person who has overcome obstacles, faced many challenges, come out on the other side, helped other people, now written a book. How many 93-year-olds do you know that have just written a book? So I think that she has proven to her audiences, whether they are in personal or professional, that she really has something to say. And so I think that is really important.
I think that is so critical. I see it too often in society today, especially in churches, where we can force people into groups based on their age rather than their stage in life, or they're in their stage of life. So you rarely see older, experienced mothers mentoring younger new moms. They put all the new moms together because they have the common problems, and they think that by addressing the common problems, they will be able to grow through that, where we need the multi-generations together in order to get that good wisdom. What do you think about that?
I think it's the interaction again. In other words, I moved up here to Massachusetts 7 years ago. Amy's young friends, I call the junior varsity. I'm the senior varsity. And I've interacted with all her friends all these years when I was visiting up here. So we became connected as not I'm their parent or their grandparent, but I'm an older woman that they could relate to who was not their grandparent or their mother. So we have had the interaction,
Whoop.
which is really important, to not block off the younger people because we're different. So I think again, it's how much interaction you have with generativity, with being with the younger generations, including my junior varsity friends who are in their 60s, and I'm in my 90s.
Who,
And I feel comfortable with them.
Gwen, who influenced you when you were a parent?
I had a wonderful aunt, the aunt who was 17, who took care of me as an infant. That Aunt Ruth, who lived to be 106, I would like you to know.
Wow.
With all her marbles connected. She was my model for how to be a grandparent. Daughters lived out of town always. They were professional women. She said she didn't miss a dance recital. She didn't miss a concert. They went back and forth. She was always in their lives, always caring about what they did. And she had the fullest, richest life of anyone I know. And she has always been my model.
So she was always at your concerts, right, Amy? And things like that.
Yeah, believe me, she did. When Amy's father died, this Aunt Ruth and that Uncle Ben were there filling in. They took Amy away on a trip with a friend. They knew enough to take Amy and another teenage friend away to Florida after Amy had been through her father's illness and death. So she was there for them also. That's been the modeling.
But the other thing about Aunt Ruthie is that she was always the most positive, never a bad word about anyone. She was the most, saw everything glass half full, very upbeat and optimistic. And that kind of nature is a great thing to emulate if you can do it.
She had pink corneas. She saw everything through a pinky color. And I never heard this woman have a bad word about anybody in all the years I knew her. So she was our model, and then through the generations. That's 4 generations of this one woman and her husband. He was a marvelous man, same way, to be our models. So you learn from many people. That is one of the points I try to convey. If people say, my mother was terrible, I say, she's not the only teacher. You had other teachers besides your mother, other mentoring figures besides your mother. There are coaches, there are teachers, there are ministers, there are neighbors. So there's a whole world full of people who are there for us if we are open to the fact that it doesn't have to be just my mother or my father.
You raised an excellent point in that many people think that in order to mentor others, you have to know everything in order to be able to do that. And when in reality, you only have to be a step or two ahead of where they are and help them guide through that experience.
I was a teacher all my life in various forms, and there were times when I had tasks that were beyond my capacity. In other words, I have severe learning disabilities, so I cannot spell. I have a master's degree in English literature from the University of Michigan. I cannot spell. I also cannot do math. But nevertheless, there was a period in my life where I was asked to teach the gifted. It was when Sputnik went up, and they needed someone to teach math and science. I said, you got to be joking. I can't add 2 and 2. You can do it. You can do it, Gwen. So I took the syllabus that they had for math. At that time, it was the new binary system math. It was the precursor to the computer. And I remembered if I stayed 1 page ahead of these kids, they didn't know the difference. And that's the way I taught, staying 1 page ahead.
That's an excellent story. I love that. Yeah, that's very good.
True that.
There are no bad experiences, right? There's only things that you didn't learn from.
That's right.
Okay.
I will say that.
And what?
My husband right now is in the hospital. I'm in a second marriage of 44 years, and this is a second marriage. He had some problem and he's in the hospital. And I don't look at that as a bad experience. What we're going to learn is that he has to eat differently and behave himself, even though he's going to be 98 this week. We are still trying to teach him to eat better. So there are no bad experiences.
One of the most prolific authors in the world is John Maxwell. And one of the things that he talks about all the time is sometimes you win and sometimes you learn. What are some of the lessons that you learned through those bad experiences?
What I learned was not to make things bigger than they needed to be, not to make myself the center of all problems. In other words, when Amy's father was dying at 49 from a brain tumor, I was going to the hospital for my usual daily visit, and I bumped into our pediatrician in the parking lot. And this pediatrician said, "Oh, Gwen, I feel so terrible for you and Bill and I. Terrible." I said, "Don't waste your pity on us. We are going to be all right. If you have any pity, have it for that man up there who's dying in the prime of his life." And that helped me, that I realized to put things where they belong. And I knew my children and I would be all right. And we are all right. It wasn't just a phony thing. I had no doubt we were going to be all right. But it's to see things the way they are and not make everything a tragedy around me when all I am is a participant in somebody else's tragedy.
You're playing a role, but you're not the center of the main character. I would agree with that. Like I said earlier, sometimes the mother-daughter relationship is fraught with a lot of disagreements and things like that. What encouragement do you have for those daughters who feel they really haven't learned anything from their moms?
First of all, I don't know that adult daughters are that self-aware to say, "What I didn't learn." And if you're X age, you certainly can't go back and analyze all of it. I think a lot of women wish they had a different mother. So it's a little bit different than what you're saying. All children learn from their mothers, unless the mother's completely absentee. But I do think a lot of women grow up saying, "I wish I had this mother or that mother, or my mother was more of this, or my mother was more of..." I think that's common. That's comparative. That's just a comparative world, I think, that we live in. But I think it's like anything else in life. You really have to try to appreciate what you have and see what the positives are. And as my mother says, as my mother always says, you have more than one teacher. You have more than one. Different people are parenting you than just your parent. So we love to tell the story of when I was in middle school that I had this best friend, Janet, and I went to her house, and I loved cake decorating, which, spoiler alert, when I was 26, I opened a cake bakery. I really liked cakes. And this mother and daughter taught me how to cake decorate, and then the mother taught me how to sew. So it was like a home ec class when I went there. And I was like 13. I was little, 12, 13. And I would come home and say to my mother, "Why can't you be like Janet's mother? Why can't you fly?" But my mother had a lot of other strengths and traits and things that enabled me to do all the things I did my whole life. You have to really see both sides of it, I think.
You need many mothers. You do. You need many mentoring. And they're meant, every teacher you ever had in grade school, those are mentoring figures, coaches. Anybody who lives in your neighborhood who has been kind to you or taken you in one day and offered you a cookie when your mother said you've had enough cookies. So you have to understand that there are people there waiting to be kind and good to you, as long as you open yourself up to the fact that there isn't just one person in the world called my mother who knows everything and does everything. So I think it's helpful. I think it's helpful to have all these parents.
So you were okay with Amy having that relationship with the woman who taught her how to bake?
I was happy for Amy that she had some mother who was doing what she wanted. I was always with a petition in my hand or doing a political thing. And I wasn't that I didn't cook and do. I just wasn't like Janet Biolamzi's mother. When Amy and Janet would come home from school, was enthralled with everything they did. I had a life interest that was beyond my children.
I know that all three of my daughters had someone special, an older adult in their life when they were in high school that played a pivotal role in guiding them. And I encourage that. A lot of parents are offended by that, but I thought it was great to have that perspective. And for the most part, they were basically reinforcing lessons that we had tried to teach the girls.
Again, it's if you make yourself more important than you really are, you are afraid to share that responsibility. I always welcomed Amy and my son, who had many mentors in his life. We can't be good at everything.
Exactly.
And so it's have the people who are good at specialized things. My son had musical mentors. He had scientific mentors. Amy had cooking and baking mentors. And by the way, Amy won the cooking, the baking
The
story.
brownie.
The brownie
Bagel.
bagel. He was 7.
Really? Oh my goodness.
Saying.
Just say it. She paid.
That was before Master Chef Junior and things like that
Oh,
too. So yes. That's
Out
cool.
of my time.
If you could share one piece of advice for today's busy, often anxiety-filled generation, what would you tell them?
Oh, I would say that you first have to understand that without anxiety, we'd all be dead because we wouldn't cross the street carefully. We wouldn't watch what we eat carefully. So anxiety is your friend. It's just a warning signal that comes from inside us that says, be careful, there's danger. The thing to realize is you don't have to be happy all the time. It's okay to be worried sometimes. It's okay to be sad sometimes. It's all part of you learning to deal with what are the fabric of life is not happy and not joy. There's all of these things. And you make friends with the things that scare you. And if you make friends with them and realize they can help you, they're not so scary. They're not so provoking of anxiety.
You just have to tiptoe. You have to walk carefully and tread wherever you're going.
And embrace it. You have to embrace the fact that life is not an easy situation. What life is a series of challenges every single day from the time you're born into this world, and you come out and you're thinking the best time you had was in your mother's womb because every need was taken care of. You were never cold, you were never hungry. So you leave paradise, you're expelled into a world, and that's what you have to learn to cope with because you only get one chance to be taken care of on every level, and that's before you're born.
My mother was paralyzed by fear. She was always worried that the bad things were going to happen, so she rarely took the risks that she might have wanted to do. Go to college as an adult or as a single mom or something like that. It just, so I like what your advice because you should understand the anxiety is there, but you should not be paralyzed by it.
Oh, I think you make friends with it. You have to understand anxiety is a necessary part of life. Without anxiety, a lot of kids would never do their homework. They would be hit by cars because they wouldn't be looking where they're going. So it's not a bad thing. It's a thing you have to learn to incorporate into your life and accept and learn to manage it better, but not to say, I have to avoid it all the time because there's no avoiding those things. Your poor mother, if she was always very frightened, she must have missed a lot of opportunities in life.
A lot of joyful opportunities.
She never knew what good things she was missing.
Exactly. That's right. We tried to tell her that things would be okay and stuff like that. It'd be okay for the girls to go canoeing and things like that. They're not going to fall into the water and drown, that type of thing. It was hard to be around somebody like that who always saw fear and danger in every situation.
You're lucky it didn't suffocate you.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. We worked beyond it. We moved beyond it. We saw the opportunities for what they were. A lot of mothers and daughters and mothers and their sons really don't have the relationships that allows these kind of conversations to take place. If somebody wanted to develop the conversations to start understanding the living history or take advantage of the kind of lessons that can be learned through these living histories, what can they do?
They don't have to write a book, but I think they can certainly chronicle some of this, and they can do it in small conversations with videos and things, and they can. Sorry.
No problem.
They can. I think I love the idea of starting at the beginning and inquiring what was it like when you were little to somebody older, and start at the beginning and go through. And then I think asking the questions of what their life was like and how they think it's different now. So I think it's just a conversation, but it's really important to chronicle it. Video. You have your phone. You can video from your phone. Take some video clips, 5 minutes at a time, and just have them because you'll never be sorry you have it. You can also do more of a Q&A, what you're doing now. You can set it up that way that there's some other person asking both of you. But I think most older people like to tell their stories.
Absolutely, they love it. And everybody has a narrative. There isn't a human being that walks this earth that doesn't have a narrative, doesn't have a story in that person. And the opportunity to tell your story and to know that somebody cares enough about it to listen to it is in itself a learning experience. But for this, as you said at the beginning, you need to be there. You need to have the look in the eyes, say, I'm here. I enjoyed that. Let's have a good laugh. Tell me what it was like to walk 5 miles in the snow in Connecticut. I'd love to hear it because I will never walk 5 miles to school in Connecticut.
One of the
So
best
this is
things I ever did was record my grandmother telling her story. This was decades ago. We just sat on her porch and I said, tell me what it was like growing up. And I recorded that 5 different sessions and made them available to all of my family members after her death. And they were like, I did not know that about her. I've never heard those stories. So it's so important to record them, like you had said, Amy. It's a great advice to be able to do that. I know that every time somebody dies, we lose a vault of wisdom and information. So it's really important that we chronicle those. How can we encourage our parents and grandparents to share their life stories? I've tried to do that with people and they say, oh, my life, nobody's going to be interested in that. But they're wrong.
I think you have to ask specific questions. You can't just say in one setting, well, sit down and tell me about your life. But I think you can ask, what were the challenges? You can ask, what was it like in elementary school? You can ask, what were the choices you made? What was your relationship with your siblings? I think if you're just going to ask an open-ended question, people are going to say, my life's not that interesting. You have to set it up that way. And maybe if you have children yourself, have them come up with a set of questions. And what are they interested in?
And the best way to do it is have a good meal together. And while you're eating and talking, you're not making it into a learning thing. We're having fun together. We're going to eat, we're going to drink, we're going to be merry, and we're going to learn while we listen.
That's right.
I think that's important, that connection, that families, I don't know how many families have meals together.
Correct.
I don't know how many families celebrate birthdays and anniversaries by eating, drinking, and being together. And that's when people tell their stories.
That's exactly right. Or around the campfire, if people were just going out in the back, having s'mores and sitting around the fire.
But you need to have some way of saying, we want to be together. We don't have to be together.
And it's can this be done over Zoom if people wanted to do that?
No, I think Zoom isn't a opportunity. I think people have to make it their business, even if they have to fly, to be in person, to be right there in the flesh, to be able to look each other in the eye, to hear the voice, to touch the hand, to have the kiss, to have the hug. And I think we have to go out of our way to get those things, but there's no substitute for them.
That's right. What do you think, Amy?
But I think you can use Zoom, but again, we disagree on this because here we are on Zoom and we couldn't have done this without Zoom. So I think you can use Zoom, but obviously in person is best. And I think you can do it with your grandchildren. You come up with a list of questions and you say, I'd love to sit down, and you can ask them questions.
Exactly.
And then they can ask questions and things like that. So I think it all comes back to our society and the lack of a value that's placed on older people. It all comes back to that. So I think that if we want to place value on the lives and the teachings and the words of older people, we need to engage them.
One more question. What can women do to work through a difficult relationship they might have had with mother and daughter?
First of all, I think you have to stop blaming your mother for everything that went wrong in your life. I think you have to understand your mother had a life. She was once a child. I had a very difficult relationship with my mother. And then I realized what her life was like one day. And I said, and this is an ironic thing to say, the longer she's dead, the more I understand how she was. The more I review in my mind what her life had to be like that created a person who could not be a better mother. So you have to really learn from history at all times, whether it's political history or personal history. You have to go back and learn what made this person the way they are, what went into this. And then you form a 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional picture of this person.
That's a very good point. What about you, Amy? Do you have any advice for younger mothers trying to connect with their older moms?
I think it's conversation. And I do think it's it is very hard. Look, you know what you know when you know it. You don't know what it's like to be a mother until you're a mother. You don't know what it's like to be a grandmother until you're a grandmother. So, and you don't know what it's like to be an adult daughter with an adult. You really don't know. And I think it's, as my mother said, it's easy to be critical of our parents. Let's not just mothers. It's easy to be critical. And so I think the best thing is to try to put yourself in their shoes. And the best way to do that is to ask questions and get to know what their world and their lives are like. Because most people have the best of intentions. They don't always have the best outcome.
It's like nobody says, I want to be a bad mother.
Right.
Nobody gets married saying, I want to get divorced. We all have optimism and hope, but it's trying to sort out. And this is a lesson for all of life. I look at the politics right now in this country and I say, if you had learned from history, you would have seen this coming and you'd have behaved differently. So what we don't learn from the past, we are forced to repeat.
That's
as
right.
if, like the reinvention of the wheel. So learning about each other's past and developing empathy so that we know what made a person the way they are very often had to do with the force of circumstance.
That's right.
In the parents' life and the grandparents' lives.
That's right. The mother who is unresponsive and aloof may have grown up with a mother and grandmother who's unresponsive and aloof, and it was never demonstrated.
Chances are that is the case. Chances are, look at the biography of Eleanor Roosevelt, whose mother rejected her, and she was the same way with her own children. She did not know how to love because she had not been taught how to love by a loving mother. But that mother, I'm sure, had a history too with her mother. So it's a question of if we can only learn the lessons from the past and apply them forward. It is a learning experience to learn to respect other people's feelings.
That's great advice. I appreciate that. How can people get this book, My Mother Always Says?
It's on Amazon, and it's also on BarnesandNoble.com, so they can get it on Amazon. My Mother Always Says, 25 Lessons for Finding the Silver Lining. We would love them to get it. We would love them to post a review and let us know what they thought of it. So that's the easiest way. Also, they can get it on my website, which is amygoober.com.
Okay. Are you active on social media? Either of you?
Yeah.
People wanted to connect with you?
Yes, I am. And everything is my name. My Facebook is Amy Goober. My LinkedIn is Amy Goober. My Instagram is amygoober.driveyourlife. So I'm all over social media. People can I would love them to reach out to me. But probably the easiest way to get all of it in one spot is my website, which is just my name, amygoober.com.
Super. Thank you very much for sharing your story today. This was uplifting to me, and I hope that it is to other people as well. And I think it will be, because I think there's a renewed interest in what happened in the past and in older generations. So I'm glad that you folks took the time to bridge that gap and model that behavior for the rest of us. So thank you. Amy Goober and Gwen Bordon's joint project, My Mother Always Says, is more than a memoir. It's a celebration of perspective and resilience. Structured around 25 life lessons, the book seamlessly blends Gwen's lived experience and signature sayings with Amy's modern reflections as a daughter, mother, and entrepreneur. Their collaboration highlights not only how wisdom is passed down, but also how it evolves through the lens of each new generation. While Gwen brings the wisdom of nearly a century, including powerful stories of overcoming early adversity, Amy offers the relatable viewpoint of a woman in her 60s navigating business, family, and purpose. Together, they model how generations can coexist not only in love, but in collaboration that brings different strengths to the table. Their story also serves as a gentle but firm nudge to those who haven't yet taken time to capture the stories of their own parents or grandparents. Both women also offered encouragement for people struggling with less than ideal relationships. Gwen, who had a complicated relationship with her own mother, said time and empathy helped her reframe her perspective, especially after understanding the difficult situations her mother endured. On the other hand, Amy reinforced that we don't need to get all our wisdom from one person. rather through many mentors, teachers, and neighbors who step into that role throughout our lives. Their message is ultimately one of hope in knowing that even fractured relationships can be healed with intention, that stories matter more than we realize, and that the most important legacy we leave might be the lessons we model through our lives. If you'd like to connect with Amy and learn more about their book, you can visit www.amygoober.com. My Mother Always Says is available on Amazon and in other bookstores. Amy also welcomes messages on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all under her name. If you're looking for inspiration to repair, record, or reflect on your own family stories, this episode is a great place to begin. That's all for this week's show. If you'd like to start living a more meaningful life, I encourage you to download our free guide to finding purpose, which is available at www.forwardfrom50.com. I'll have another inspirational interview on the next episode of the Forward from 50 podcast. Thanks for listening, and if you like the show, please consider leaving a review wherever you download the episodes.